go ahead and turn it over to Sayard. Go ahead.
All right, good morning, everyone. Here today to talk about assistive technology consideration. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about because to me, everything with assistive technology starts with making sure that we've found all the factors that might be difficult for a student, found all of their strengths, and being able to match them to the correct tool. So I put a lot of content in here today, as you can see if you've gone through the presentation or looked through the notes, and we're going to get through. I'm providing summaries of many types of consideration that can be done, and I'm trying to also provide resources or links to outside presentations that have been done in the past and websites and information. So hopefully, after leaving this hour, you'll have some places to start to find some answers for your students. So to begin with, my mission today is to make sure that we get a little deeper into that legal requirement to do a true consideration. I've been in IEP meetings where there's been really good consideration, and I've met teams too that either might gloss over where that consideration happens in the IEP, or might kind of read from a script and go through, or just say, we decided it was no. So we want to make sure that we are giving it that good go at least once a year. It's not a static process. Consideration is something that can completely evolve as the student changes and advances, or unfortunately might decline, or our tasks or environment might change. So by the time we're done today, I want you to be able to explain consideration in your own words. I think this is a good skill to have, to just be able to kind of off the cuff, talk to a parent without a lot of jargon, or talk to a teacher who might not be as familiar with assistive technology about what consideration is. I kind of think of it as my AT elevator pitch. We also want to describe the factors that should go into consideration, regardless of what model you might be using. How to document and implement AT, because if we don't write it down, it's not going to happen in the beautiful way we considered it. And then be able to bookmark a few assistive technology resources. I love going away from a session with a few websites that I can go back and revisit. So let's start out by looking at what is consideration. I've outlined here some of the things that go into this. We'll start with some of the laws that do govern that. Most assistive technology people know these laws pretty much by heart, but under the Individuals with Education Act, we do have three big sections that apply to assistive technology. Assistive technology consideration says that we have to make sure that we're going through with each student, looking at their strengths and the difficulties that they have within their environment, and we have to find something that can increase, improve, or maintain their access to the curriculum and their environment. If we look at assistive technology device, it can be anything that is manufactured, off the shelf, or even sometimes low-tech things that we create within our environment that can help a student access that curriculum or environment. And then there's the assistive technology service. Now, I always get a little meta here because really there is no AT person, even though I am standing here talking to you. Assistive technology integrates into what everyone on the team does. And a lot of this presentation today is school focused, though it can apply to kind of that medical model and rehabilitation outside of school as well. So that assistive technology service can be somebody helping you match up a device, obtain a device, train on a device, and make sure that the student is set up for success. Some of these definitions that come about, this is something that, at assistive technology conferences, if you catch me at the right moment, we can chat on into the night about the difference between these definitions. Consideration is something that is going to happen at least once a year during the IEP meeting, and we need to know if a student needs that AT to be able to receive their free appropriate public education and be able to document that decision one way or another. Evaluation, and I got these definitions out of the WADI, Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative document. This is the process by which the team collects the information. The terms evaluation and assessment get kind of used pretty synonymously, though sometimes I've been in meetings with lawyers or with teams where kind of the expectations look a little different between evaluation and assessment and consideration. So I try to find that using the consideration models is the best way for me to document what went through my head. I try to teach my teams, trying to build their capacity because they can do assistive technology stuff too. There's not one AT person. We try to teach them as well the things that they need to think about and what information they need to collect. Assessment, I consider kind of this is, we found something that matches with the student. Maybe we have all of the information assembled that we need. We just need to find the tool and try it out to make sure that it works for the student. So I try to get with teams and say, okay, my evaluation, if we want to call it that, is everything we know about the student, whereas my assessment might end up being an addendum to the evaluation. My evaluation might give me a few theories of, I want to try this type of tool or this exact tool, whereas the assessment is going to tell me, did that tool work? I always like to go back to the quality indicators for assistive technology. If you go to qiat.org, there are some amazing resources that have been put together by a coalition of very smart assistive technology people. And they have made these great rubrics and outlines for what should happen with different parts of assistive technology. I know some may be familiar with this. This may be new to others. And when you look at assistive technology consideration, these are the things that they identified must happen with that. We consider it for all students, that it's collaborative. And I emphasize that because my background is as a speech pathologist. And if I have a student who is having difficulty reading or having difficulty with a diagnosis of dyslexia, I need to collaborate with that reading specialist. I think I know a lot about reading, but I want to make sure that I'm getting that collaboration in with that person who's the best expert on the team. We need to use collective knowledge that kind of dovetails off of that. And we need to make sure that we're going based on the goals and objectives that are happening within that environment. And this could either be progress in the general ed curriculum, being able to access the least restrictive environment. This is something that's come up as a bit of a topic as we move students back into the classroom, is their least restrictive environment doesn't always look like what we as perhaps people who have not had an IEP think of as a least restrictive environment. There are students we have seen make more progress at home. So it's really an interesting thing to think about. We need to think about how we're taking data, explore a range of tools. Consideration shouldn't just be, we have, I'm going to use this example, Read and Write Gold. So Read and Write Gold is their assistive technology. Okay, it might be, though that might be something that's implemented as more of a universal design for learning framework. So we need to make sure we're making that if we're using Read and Write Gold, it has the exact features a student needs for accommodation. And finally, we need to make sure that it's documented. All the time, if a student comes in, I've had students come in with equipment written into the assistive technology part of the IEP, and I just think, okay, they put down a scanner and a printer. Okay, so what are we using the scanner and the printer for? And we can investigate and go back and figure that out, though we want to make sure it's documented so people don't have to dig. These are some of the do's and don'ts that I always kind of give out to my teams as far as what we can do with the IEP. If you're familiar with the old Sunday comics, Goofus and Gallant, Goofus was always the one doing things that maybe he shouldn't be doing. Goofus is running with the scissors pointing up, whereas Gallant usually found the right thing to do. He is walking with his scissors pointing down. So when looking at an IEP, this is what I want to see from teams. I want there to be discussion prior to the meeting. And when I say team, I'm involving the student, I'm involving the parent as well, even though I know it doesn't always come back that way. But I think that everyone needs to come to the table with an idea of what the recommendation will be, just like with our goals, but also being open to change if the parent says, I don't know if that's going to work. I think sometimes we feel threatened if we've written this beautiful goal and it's a SMART goal and our supervisor likes it and the LEA is like, that's an awesome goal. And the parent says, I don't get that goal. But really, it's just some time for education and maybe making a tweak to your goal because it might be better for the student. So I always have listening to parent ideas as a definite do underneath there. So the IEP is very important when we're coming to consideration because it is basically a case study or a collection of all the information we have about the student. So when we come into an assistive technology process, I took this assistive technology consideration flowchart from the Illinois Assistive Technology Manual. And when I show this to teams, even though it's just kind of a basic decision tree branching off, it looks a little overwhelming, especially because if you get down to D, it says, does the IEP team have the knowledge and skills necessary to make the decision? And if you get down to F with no, it says discontinue the IEP process. Oh boy, there's one thing that you probably don't want to happen once you sit down at the table is to discontinue and reconvene the IEP. So I think sometimes teams get a little bit challenged when they come down to that section, especially because you might have a little bit of doubt. Do we have the expertise? Or they might just say, we know he doesn't use it, so we're not going to keep going, and they might miss something that could help the student. So that does look pretty fun. But as we go through models of consideration and processes, this is pretty standard as to what happens on the back end. But I think the way that it is presented in the consideration can change the way the team might think and change what is chosen for the student. So we have to think about our IEP the same as some of these quiet trademarks that say this is what we should do for best practice. We need to be collaborative, have collective knowledge, and own what you know. Everybody who's in this circle right here is somebody who knows something about that student as well as knows something professionally. When we're looking at assistive technology, I know there's a program I work with now where it's kind of fallen to the SLPs do everything with that AT box. But at the same time, the SLP, I'm going to say, I don't know much about a wheelchair. You give me a kid with a wheelchair, I am calling my PT friend because I don't want to hurt that kid. If we have a student who's working on math, I'm going to call the math teacher because I could do my math all the way up through graduate school, but I'm going to want somebody who knows that pedagogy and everything behind teaching it. So the service provider who has the expertise really should be the one kind of taking the deep dive in that box, though really everyone on the team should take a look at that box. I make the joke of the one ring to rule them all. That might be your assistive technology consideration. Your assistive technology might be giving access to something very broad, like physical access to the environment, or maybe something very specific, like a pencil grip when a student's doing a paper and pen task, which, those have been decreasing a lot, especially with our remote working. Or it might be a reading tool. And even though we might think it's just the reading teacher, we read in math, we read in science, we read in history, we read in social studies. Sometimes we read in gym. So we need to make sure that that's going across the entire team. And absolutely, when we have that person who's an expert, jump in on it. I've actually found my physical therapists are really good at access, but my hidden gem has been my assistive PE teachers, the APE department. They are amazing. They do the adapted PE for our students who might have some other difficulties, and they consult a lot with the PT, but the ways that they've found for our students to access recreation and leisure are awesome. And I love having that documented in the IEP. Does the student need a soccer ball that has a bell that goes off when you kick it so the student knows they've made contact? I didn't really even know that much about these things until our APE people were filling me in. Everybody on the team has an observation they can make. And I'm not kind of living in dream world too much because I know IEPs are sometimes done in a very rushed between classes. I don't have a lot of prep time way, But I think that if every person who gets into that IEP takes a moment in the assistive technology consideration box, or the team can meet and everybody can say their piece about it, it's going to serve the student more in the long run. There's a lot of things that can be done that are kind of more written out and more guided on the DeCoste writing protocol, the protocol for accommodations in reading. There's AAC protocols, power chair evaluations, and those might be done by somebody in a specific field or by different team members. So it's something the team should determine, like, who is the best person? Are we looking at their motor writing, or are we looking at their actual content of their writing? I think about the role of an assistive technology professional as being a project manager. There are times that I come in and there's a meeting and it's just the SLP at the table, and it's like, well, the student's having trouble with reading and writing, so I'm going to need a few more people at this table. I'm going to need some more information during that assessment process. Do we not have an idea of what the student's current reading level is? Maybe that's something that should be evaluated. And as an SLP, I always say there's some stuff I can do, but really the person teaching reading should be evaluating these things throughout the year. So they should be our person number one, our expert. And then I can help teams with organizing a plan to follow up and guiding through that fun flowchart process. So assistive technology should integrate into everyone's evaluation. As far as people on this call, there might be people who have the role of either being a teacher or a PT or an OT or a speech therapist, or maybe there's an adapted PE person here. But when we look at each evaluation, when we come to that summary and conclusions, that's where you can definitely write in something that is specific to your field, or something that helps the student access in your particular area. So we want to make sure that we're in that summary of need, you're listing some assistive technology. One profession that does really awesome with this is when our students go and get neuropsych reports outside of school, and they go to the neuropsychologist, typically the last page of their report is a list of assistive technology that should be attempted or used. Now, I've worked with a couple of these neuropsychologists multiple times, and they tend to have the same last page of their report for a lot of students. So they're thinking about AT, but I wouldn't necessarily say they're doing individualized consideration. But that's something that I'd like to see more out of all team members, because you have the capacity to do it, and it's just building up. We have to think about assistive technology as a way to solve a problem. This is the way that really has jived with me as far as thinking about it overall. So a lot of consideration models have something like this or that decision tree in the background. We need to consider, trial, implement, and monitor. This circle here I really like, because it really can take you through what you do in an IEP year. And if you get to that point of, is it working? It can kind of remind the team, hey, maybe we should go back and reconsider this, amend the IEP, because what we thought this was going to do for the student isn't doing it for them. I also see this with students who might have the mid-year or end of the year IEP. What worked at the end of the year in 6th grade may not work at the beginning of the year in 7th grade. As far as that consideration, kind of bouncing back to that decision tree and some of the things behind that, we need to understand, like, if we are intervening and the student is making progress and they're accessing, maybe we don't need AT. And that's a good reason to write down, hey, the student's making progress without additional tools. It's already being used. Hey, let's make sure that we document what's working. If it's not being used, maybe we're going around and looking at different things, or it's a teenager. I will say teenagers don't like looking different. And if a 16-year-old tells me they are not going to use AT, I believe them, because usually if they're being people pleasers, they'll tell me they will and then they don't. But they say they're not going to use it, we might be coming back to the table to figure out another solution. Or we might not know enough. And that's not where you want to be when you come to the IEP table, because we know our students. So as we get into models of consideration, this is something that could be done at the IEP table, but it's not a quick, snappy 2-minute process. It's something where really you're gathering a lot of information together. And if you have a really good IEP team, hopefully they've done this before getting to the meeting. If you're at the table, you could probably do it. It would just take some time and adding on to the meeting, which for our parents of our students, definitely taking the time off of work and getting in for the meetings can be frustrating, and they want to be involved, but we want to respect their time as well. So I've listed some of the models I'm going to talk about today here on the right. Consideration, when I look at a model, I think of it as something that guides the conversation. It's not necessarily a worksheet where you go in and fill in a form. To me, the best considerations are when you have a group of professionals who know the student, who have come together. They know what questions to ask. They can develop a theory about what is that one thing. Maybe if we're looking at a task demand analysis, what is that one thing giving the student trouble? And then what is a tool that can help the student with that one thing? Just very basically, feature matching is something that lies after we've done our consideration and decided what a child needs. Feature matching is finding that need and a tool that works to increase, improve, or maintain function for the student. It's not exactly math, but I did use a plus sign and an equal sign. So that's the most simple way that I can describe it to a team. I did reference back to an AbleNet webinar from 2018. It's excellent. It has some good handouts with that, and it goes all the way deep dive into feature matching, because I know I can't dive super deep into each of these today. I wanted to give you some resources to follow up on. If teams can understand feature matching, I think that it makes conversations around consideration much easier to start and continue in a productive and knowledgeable way. Our teams have so much knowledge. We want to make sure we're getting that down on paper. Probably the biggest thing that is used for consideration, at least in my area, I'm in Northern Illinois, is the SETT framework. I really enjoy listening to Joy Zavala. I think I've been to her presentations enough times that, honestly, I'm like, yeah, I knew that. But even without a lot of new information, it is something that every time I hear it, I come back and come away with something new about it. She always will say, this is not an evaluation. It's a framework to guide you. The way that I will usually set this framework up is I'll do something that I call SETT, but I take away the tools, because I found the team wants to jump to the tools. But if we don't know the task, then we can't really know what tool is going to work. I mean, that's where I think sometimes tools that are really universal design for learning get inserted in. If we figure out that student environment and task part first, then we can definitely get in and look at more targeted tools. And if it is something that's used universally at your school, it's something that should still be documented under that consideration when you look at perhaps a student going to a different school, or even a student moving into a post-secondary environment, where if they had that tool built in for years, they are not seeing it as something special. They go to college and all of a sudden they're struggling, and it's going to take some work to figure out that the missing piece was that tool that was just there in the environment the whole time. So with the SETT framework, one thing that I see that happens, and Joy has pointed this out in her presentations as well, is that people write out the acronym and they're like, okay, we're good. But there's a lot more to it than that. There are several pages, there are guidance documents, there are scaffolds for how you can do all of these things here. Consider the needs, gather data, make that tool selection, and implement and evaluate how effective it is. I think that when teams just kind of set up this first page here of SETT, they're missing out on some of the guiding questions that can help you figure out what questions do I need to ask about the student, the environment, and the tasks. That tool selection resource is great once you've figured out those first couple things, but we need to make sure we're asking the right questions before we get there. Test is something very similar. This goes back to something called the tool belt theory, which was put forward by Sokol in 2008. And that was after SETT was, I think SETT started 2000, maybe, if I'm remembering the year correctly. With Sokol, he based on the concepts that students have to make sure, and I like this quotation, must learn to assemble their own readily available collection of life solutions. And I like this because it's holistic and it goes beyond the school environment, because we're very concerned with having awesome IEPs and everything K through 12 or pre-K through transition, whatever a student needs. But they're going to have a nice bubble of life, hopefully a long, nice bubble of life after they leave school. So we need to make sure that students are ready to be independent. How many of us have seen a junior or senior in high school that still needs someone to prompt them to use their tool or to turn on or set up or log into the tool? These are great places to write goals. If somebody wants an AT goal, say, okay, can they operationally turn it on and navigate it? Can they problem solve it? His theories go more to, we want to reduce the limitations that students have and help bring them into the decision-making process. And this really jives a lot with what's going on in transition world in terms of self-determination. If we can teach a student to consider what works, we'll be in a good spot. What I also like about TEST is there are more, the questions are outlined a little bit more. See, people could still write the acronym on the side of the page, but from the handout that I linked to on this page, it frames it with the questions underneath it. So it does kind of come down more to one sheet of paper. And these are things that I think teams think about in a different way. Looking at what needs to be done, you can break it down into component parts. I always remind my teachers that no matter where you went to school, they probably had to do a task analysis of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or whatever people make now that we can't have peanut butter. But they probably had to do that at some time in school. So they know how to do this task analysis and what part of it's difficult. Looking at the environment, some of these questions are things that I've pulled over when I use the SETT framework as well. Especially that time constraints was something I don't think I was completely considering each time that I worked with a student. You have to compare that standard method. How does a student without an IEP do it versus our student with one? We have to look at the disability and how it interacts within the environment and who it's being done for. This is important too, because a teacher is going to look at a student's results with a lot of background about that student and knowledge about their accommodations and modifications. An employer might not have as much latitude or as much grace, so to speak, when seeing what a student has accomplished. Skills, the strengths and weaknesses. IEPs have become so great with strengths that I've left IEP meetings thinking, what's going wrong with this student? Why do they still have an IEP? And it's awesome to build up the strengths, and it's empowering for the student, and it helps the parent, because this is a very emotional thing, no matter what grade level you are at. But if we can't sit down at the IEP table and say, this is the problem, where can we say it? We also have to think about what's their aptitude for learning a new tool. I've had students that had said, wow, you know what, it would be really great if this student could use word prediction. But this is the student that when we're sitting down and trying out word prediction, 2 months in, we still have somebody sitting next to them, cueing them on how to do it. We have to think about the tools. And these are the questions I love to bring back. If I'm using the SETT framework, I bring these over when I let people get to that tool conversation. We have to think about what's bridging the gap, what's in that toolbox, taking a look at the UDL, and making sure that we can train or pre-train the student. If they aren't able to use that word prediction yet, is there something that might be a step easier? Maybe using a word bank program instead of word prediction. We have to think about the scaffolding with that too, and how we can train to maybe increase that tool aptitude. It's not a grade on the report card, but it's increasingly, especially over the last year, become a prerequisite for doing well in school is understanding the technology. The task demand analysis is something that can be in the background of a few different consideration models. Though I like using this as part of my assistive technology reports. I will make this exact graph here. I will pick out the activity or task and what the expectations are that come out of that, and then go through what these task demands are. And this came from some of the research from David Copenhaver and Karen Erickson, and how they kind of classify what we can break down for a student. It's a little bit different than making your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you know, you have to you have to collect your ingredients, open the twist tie on the bread, get into that plastic bag that wants to stick to your hands and pull out your bread. Those are the things that are the nitty gritty steps. When we're looking at task demand, affective, does the student want to make the sandwich? This is a really tricky one for having a matching AT feature, but maybe if the student's motivated by technology, if we got them a robot, it would be cool. That's going way beyond what we typically have in assistive technology, but you know, affectively, do they want to do math? Do they want to do the writing? If they're not motivated by the writing prompt, does that change how they interact with it versus when it's something that's high interest? When we look at physical demands, if we're doing that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, do I have the fine motor to get that twisty tie off? Do I have the gross motor and the control to not completely squish my piece of bread? Can I open the jar of, you know, jelly or peanut butter or whatever I'm using? Sensory, I always come into my occupational therapist and I say, okay, we're not necessarily talking about like, is this alerting, calming, etc. That is important, and I'm going to put it under here, but we have to think about the other senses. Visually, can the student see what they're doing? Can they hear as they are given just instructions with that? Cognitively, can they sequence? Can they put that task together? Attentional, are you going to need to keep pulling them back in? Do they need a schedule or step-by-step to follow? And then communicative, and we have to think, are they receiving the instructions in the language? And are they able to put out communication that demonstrates what their knowledge is? So under student performance, if you're thinking through a particular student in your mind at the moment, that is something that definitely we can I think analyze for pretty much every student we have, especially if we identify that task. I'll give some more information on task demand analysis, but when we look at the activity, for example, if I'm putting writing up there, I want to know when I'm writing, there's a couple things that go into it. Am I looking at how the student physically writes? Or am I looking at how the student organizes their writing? Or am I looking at how the student uses language in their writing? So all of those things could apply. You have to find the exact thing that the student is having difficulty with and go through. And then the matching AT features, and that's where we're coming to the tool portion that comes up in every model of consideration. The WATI, or the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, is a big one, and they have a lot of free materials available as well. Again, they were the ones who came up with this definition, and they have kind of been around, you know, since about the last century, which is kind of fun to say sometimes, but they've been around a while as far as helping to establish some of the philosophies when we consider assistive technology. What they have, and the reason I kind of skipped ahead a little bit, is when we look at tools and that tool part, whether it be the SETT framework, whether it be task demand analysis, whether it be the tool belt theory or anything we talk about afterwards, this is what I'm always looking for in tools. Notice there are no brand names in here. Brand names change. If you've ever been to an AT conference, you're going to notice that the vendors change. You might have a vendor that you really like, and then in the next row, you see somebody whose product you didn't like the year before, but they tweaked it, now it's better. So what you want to identify is the feature that you want in that tool to help the student. I like that they give this broad range of examples because it also can help if you say, okay, yeah, we're wanting a keyboard with accessibility options, and you go in your computer lab and you're like, oh, we had those in here already. That's universal, but it's helping you identify exactly what is helping that student. I chose computer access because I think that's an area that a lot of people aren't as familiar with the brand names in, so it's a little easier to wrap our heads around. But just knowing what type of tool you need is really more important almost than the name of the actual tool. And I know that that sounds a little like heresy because we need to know the name of the actual tool eventually. But this is that step that I think gets skipped a lot when we're really trying to match a tool to a student. The human activity assistive technology model, this is more of a medical model. If you are in an assistive technology certificate program, you'd probably be very familiar with either the Cook and Hussey or Cook and Polgar in the older edition text, which says, okay, we have to match the human, which would be the equivalent of our student if we were in the school, the activity, which would be our task demand, if we're looking at that, and the assistive technology, which is the feature of the tool or what tool is helping a student to access. And we have to look at all of that in context, because the way I access things at home may be different than the way I might do it at a restaurant, may be different than the way I do it at a job. So there are a lot of the same themes through many of these models of consideration. It's just they are arranged a little bit differently and defined a little bit differently. And one thing with this HAT model is it's also taking some of the information from disability studies that the disability is the environment, not the person. And I really love that phrase. The disability is the fact that there are stairs there. It's not the fact that you can't climb them. If we put a ramp there, then is there a disability? You're able to get up the ramp, you accomplish the task of getting into the building. CAST is another big player. They have these really cool assistive technology wheels. You can purchase these on their website. You can even purchase an electronic copy, and you can go around to an area that a student might be using. I know this is a little bit blurry here, but that's seating and positioning. We can go to computer access, organization and studying, activities of daily living. And what it's going to do is list out, again, the types of tools that are needed. Now notice, we have a lot of these here. If I go back a couple slides, it's some of the same things that we see in the WADI. This is just underlying of assistive technology consideration, and we want to make sure that it's a step we don't miss. The wheels I found that my teachers really like because it gives it to them in something nice and compact. CAST also has some really cool universal design for learning guidelines in a wheel on their website. That's kind of fun too. You can look at some ways that you can incorporate technology into the class to kind of accommodate everybody at once. And just always remember, you have that student that needs it versus the student that's just kind of getting that as kind of an addition to their pedagogy. This is one of my favorites. It really is. This is the GPAT, the Georgia Project for Assistive Technology. I found my teachers really like this one. If I'm handing them a consideration model and saying, you can do it, they really like using this one. I'm going to go to their site. Of course, I put the sound bar right over where I'd opened my different documents. So if we get to the GPAT website, they have an assistive technology process guide, as well as a resource guide and a glossary guide. The resource guide is going to look like that resource guide. It's going to look like our CAST resource guide, something basic with that. There's a glossary, which can be awesome if a teacher's saying, okay, there's a lot of jargon here, or if you're at the table at an IEP and want to explain to a parent. But the actual consideration guide is what the teachers like because it's a worksheet. And what it's doing is sometimes I found that if teachers can identify what's going on in this first section here, what is the general area where they're having difficulty. With some students, you're going to just light this up and check boxes. With other students, it might help you kind of differentiate and say, oh, you know what? Really, this is the area that's giving them the most trouble. You come down, you take that area and instructional task where they're having difficulty, what your standard materials are, accommodations you're trying, assistive technology solutions that you might want to try. You can put in things the student's already using or things you want to try. The teachers like this because of the way it's organized. You get placed to do a bunch of different instructional tasks. And then down here with consideration, if you say no to assistive technology, you can say, oh, right. So the student doesn't need AT because as long as they have this accommodation, they can do it. A student doesn't need AT because as long as they have this modification, they can do it. Or yes, they need it. And I really like this because you can say it's required. We know what it is and we're going to do it. Or here's that one that comes to the dreaded box. The team needs additional information. However, if you can document this is the additional information that you're going to use, that's a good way to say to the parent, you know, hey, can we make an IEP amendment? This makes a really good case for it as well. And you've got documentation, you have consistency, and those are things that are just paramount to making sure that you have your assistive technology figured out. What I also will show you from this website is their resource guide. And this is where the teachers also like it because you notice we had 4 columns on that worksheet we're filling out. We also have 4 columns here. So you get what you can put in there. And if you say write, what in here with writing is difficult? I just evaluated a student and I honestly, just to kind of explain this a little bit more to the team, because mom was saying, oh, she just has trouble with writing when it's worksheets. I copied all of this. And as I went through and did the DeCoast writing protocol and a few other activities, I took and tried out some of these tasks and left the ones on there that were difficult and said to mom, but when we try these things, this is where we're seeing some difficulty. We went through some of the classroom materials. We looked at what accommodations do work for the student and what's not. Like if we gave her more time, she'd shut down just because, you know, I already know I didn't do it right. So why should I keep working at it? And then we got to the assistive technology solutions. And I like this list because it gets a little bit longer as well. Notice still no product names. However, you should be set up to make that good match. So I really like the GPAT in terms of something that can help the team with making that consideration. And you can get to that right here at gpat.org. I also put a link to it. This is one of the websites that I kind of like to play with. We're continually building it through the Illinois State Board of Education. We have some nice resource guides here that talk about what we should be looking for when we get to the tool. And if I go to writing, it kind of goes through the different task demands, the different skills that need to be considered. This comes a lot from the GPAT, but then also goes into some product recommendations or places that you can search for things that can help with writing. Okay, coming back to the presentation here. These are just some things that I think will be good resources for your teachers if you're working to build their capacity, because they can do it. You give the teachers the right questions to ask and the right resources, they can definitely do it. The matching person to technology is probably one of the oldest consideration frameworks. Is started in the late 80s, and it's a beautiful wheel. I will say that sometimes teams get a little bit overwhelmed looking at this, especially when it's like, wait, legislative and political school, but we know economic can affect us. The full text of one of the articles that kind of gives an overview of the MPT can be downloaded here. There are fillable forms that were last updated in January of 2021, which I will say in assistive technology world, a tool that's been updated for 41 years, it's got a lot of good information. It, to me, takes longer than some of the other consideration models, though it is something that I will come to if I'm not finding the answer I want in those other consideration models, or if I have a more complex case. just to continue with that, Dr. Marcia Shearer is the one who put all of this together. And she actually, through a project, I think it was with one of the universities in Oklahoma, did videos of how to use the matching person and technology framework. And this is something that I think is very valuable, especially if you're new to consideration. Even if this is not the framework you are using, this gives you a lot of the background understanding coming in underneath that. This framework also really takes into consideration those mismatches of technology and the person. This is where you see abandonment. I put a link in here a little further into the presentation of a webinar that I did for AbleNet on adoption versus abandonment of tools, and she had her information there. So we need to think about so many factors beyond just let's get a pencil grip. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes the answer is here's a pencil grip, honey, you're all right, but it isn't always. AAC, I will not go too deep down that rabbit hole because it's a fun rabbit hole. There's lots of toys down there, but these are some resources that can be used. A lot of this, again, is asking questions that experienced SLPs are just like, I'm just asking the question. I don't need the assessment. Probably not. But these can be great tools if someone is newer to assistive technology, or if a parent wants to see your reasoning behind why you chose something, or a team wants to see your reasoning why you chose something. Or let's say, since we're in schools or medical, our administrators really want to know how we got to that decision. So these can be great ways to outline that and to help you write goals, because you can see what the next task was that a student had difficulty with. This practical AAC article here is one that is referenced a lot on the message boards. Some of the links are not functional, just because either the person who authored the website is no longer maintaining it, or it might be a tool that's just not used anymore. And I will make a note on the communication matrix. It is still free for families, though if you use it as a professional more than a certain number of times a year, they are asking for a $2 per use donation so that they can keep their project and website going. And then the ALP here, I think, is really awesome for breaking down the tasks and task demands of communication and AAC, and for writing goals. I refer all of my first year speech path or new to AAC people to this framework on the ALP. It came from occupational therapy world. It's got a lot of nice research behind it, and can give you a lot of nice information about what questions to ask. And that's what underlies a lot of consideration. This is a tool that's currently in development, and it's something that we've had a lot of fun with. We went through a group of assistive technology professionals and myself in the Infinitec Southwest Coalition in Illinois. We went through all of these consideration models and all of the questions that we're asking, and we created a dynamic form. You should be able to access this. I think I made the link live. If I did not, I will get that turned on for you, because at this point, play with it, send me some feedback. Oh wait, this is the feedback form. I did open the feedback form, so I might have put the wrong link in there for you. But the process form, what it does is it's kind of a dynamic display adventure where you're going to go through and answer a lot of the questions that you see on the SETT and test, and even from the MPT, and answer those questions. And by the time you get to the end, you can go a couple different ways. You either say, hey, I know what type of tool I need at this point, or I need to get more expertise at my table. So I will pull up and post that link for you. We always need to make sure that things are data driven no matter what we do. And I think that in using consideration models, it makes it easier to direct to the data. I used to use like the tick mark plus minus data. With assistive technology, I found it's not that effective for the information that I want. So what I've started doing is thinking about it more as a model of a case study or an A-B simple design. I want to compare, how did the student do without my assistive technology? And then let's take a work sample of what they did with my assistive technology. And let's see how that compares. If I know the task demand, I can definitely compare, hey, the student was able to perform the motoric aspect of writing much better once they were handed a pencil grip as compared to before when they did not have one. You can consider a learning curve and say, hey, we're going to collect a work sample once a week through the end of the semester and compare them all to see if the student has become more proficient with this tool and if this tool has helped them get better. As far as trials, if you take the learning curve into account, if you're looking at a trial on an AAC device, it's going to be pretty long. If you're looking at something on a computer program that requires more interaction, it's going to be long. If we look at as far as even Dragon Naturally Speaking, it's a little bit more of a complex program, and a student has to learn not just to speak to it, but how to edit, how to punctuate, how to make sure the grammar is there. So it could be a little bit longer of a learning curve, but you can definitely collect that data along the way. Evaluation, again, I think AAC is a great example of the team approach that needs to be taken. I know a lot of SLPs are like, I want to own the AAC evaluation. And I invite you to think of yourself as that project manager in this context, because if you're reading through all the parts that are considered in an AAC evaluation, you can definitely tell that they're not necessarily all speech path skills. In imaginary IEP land.
Yes. I hate to interrupt, but the captioning has turned off. Is it possible you can turn that back on?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No worries. If you ever want to turn on captioning in Google, it's so fun now and it's free. Okay, thank you. Okay, we got that back on. And we're right here at Briley May's slide of there's more. This is just some resources to go to some of the things that I mentioned briefly before. These are evaluations, quote unquote, which, just kind of help you find what information to pull together. A lot of them are a little bit older, but that's okay. I put in some things for different places that can look at computer access, vendors, just different ways that you can look and get some actionable data. So that's just kind of a resource section of this presentation. When you start choosing and trialing, we need to make sure that it's based on data. And I talk about this in adoption all the time. We have to know what the kids think. And this is my new favorite thing to say, the hat cared what Harry Potter thought. It didn't just put him in a house because it wanted to. Again, coming back to Chip and Sarah with the ALP, we've got a lot of resources here at the end for you. We need to know and implement what we're going to do with the tool. We need to know the type of tool, brand name, and any personalization that we're doing for it. So it's a keyboard. We might have a brand name for that keyboard. We might say, okay, we need an on-screen keyboard. We might need a stand for it. We might need to go in and make personalizations within the settings. We might need a Bluetooth connection for this keyboard to work. So our assistive technology can get very deep in terms of describing exactly what the student needs. So you have to know what's available in your building, in your classrooms already as universal design, as well as other resources. I like the Closing the Gap February issue, always has tons of resources. Infinitec is something that works for us locally. It is also in a few other states, I believe, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Kansas. So they are kind of expanding. And also you have to know how to research where you're finding your tools. This is where you can find the stuff. Once you have a name for what you're looking for, alternative keyboard, try it out. Go into Google and type in alternative keyboard. You'll get some options. It's a great lead. There are also AT device databases, as well as every state receives federal funding and is required to have an assistive technology program. If you follow this link, it will go and show you what the program is for your state. You get the email address, everything that you need. And then once you kind of know what you need, you can always reach out to the manufacturer or supplier because they are pretty amazing at being accommodating with training and sometimes trials as well. Then last, we need to think about putting it into place, or all that consideration we did is not going to matter. So there's a whole presentation on this. I did just add some of that information into this presentation as well. We need to know who's taking care of these things. And if it's the student or if it's the family, that's great, because that is going to have better long-term outcomes for the student. We need to think about how we're taking that data. The Quest form is something that I really like. It's out of Quebec, and it lets the user rate how that assistive technology is working for them. So I invite you to explore that resource as well. And we have to think that that data bridges the gap from our first consideration of we have an idea of what will work for the student in order to move towards that final recommendation. And this is where in my evaluation, it might end with just some ideas and what we should do to trial. That final recommendation is an addendum that may come down the road. Think about items that are off the shelf. This I cut a boat in half guy is like my favorite thing since Billy Mays. We need to know how things are going to be put together and fixed, especially from those 3 AT laws. We have to make sure that somebody's there to service it, customize it, and fix it. And we have to think about removing barriers. I didn't post it in here, but Kelly Key and Daniel Cochran do an amazing presentation on how to scaffold reading supports into helping students using text to speech so that they are able to get that support while they begin and move forward. And then having a backup plan. A lot of things go wrong in AT world. So I say I'm a project manager and I'm a problem solver. Teaching that student how to problem solve is going to be of the utmost importance. So make sure the team has strategized, and then make sure you revisit that assistive technology and try not to wait until the IEP if you've got some time, which I know that's gold in the school. But needs change. They could improve, decline, or advance. Just as I said back at the beginning, there might be something new or more innovative or better battery life that comes out. We have to think about that increase, improve, maintain. That's at the heart of assistive technology. If a student is still getting one-to-one assistance to use the technology and it really hasn't changed anything, is that the right match? So kind of got through the end there. The last 2 sections were a lot of resources that I felt kind of add on to some of the consideration models that I referred to. So if you have any questions, I'm going to be here for a bit to answer. You can feel free to email me. I know there's also a feedback form. And thank you so much for joining me today. I could talk about consideration for a few more hours. So if you ever see me at a conference when we're back live, come on over and we'll have some fun.
There was one comment about the gpat.org link, that it does need to be updated.
Okay, because I went from the presentation, so I will check that. Thank you. You know what? Maybe I was clicking on the one right here. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So it looks like
to be gpat.gadoe.org.
Georgia Department of Education. Okay. All right, I will get that changed in the original. I'm flying on a copy here, so I will get that changed.
All right, it looks like we don't really have any other questions. So thank you so much for all of your great information. And for those of you still on, the bit.ly link is a live link, and I believe Sayard will be updating that. So I recommend you check that out. Thank you so much, Sayard.
All right, thank you. And I just saw someone asking if I can type it in the The bit.ly link. I think it's in that email. Let's see. I can try to do that before we get
I
on.
can go ahead and get that.
Okay, thank you. As I say, it's in here.
Yeah, I will put it in the chat. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sayard. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye.